guess we've started. All right. So today I'm just gonna work. Just gonna work on some Legend of Redneck. Don't really have much else planned, you know. There's not gonna be any special guests. Not gonna be any musical numbers. I mean, it could happen. I don't know. I might turn the fan on later because it's actually getting kind of warm. Um, but for now, I'm just gonna get started. Hope your day has been going well. As for myself, as for me and my house, it's been going all right. Just a little tired, a little feeling a little poopy, you know. Went to Tai Chi class last night and uh really felt just completely just worn out, just tired. It happens sometimes. I don't even feel like I do that much in Tai Chi class, but I have noticed like it's hard to describe what I'm about to describe because you would have to be in the exact same setting that I'm in. So, you know, what I'm about to talk about is very speculative in nature. But I've noticed like over the last I would say let's say the last couple of months, maybe even 3 months. I've noticed that when I practice, so like at the beginning of every class, right, we do like warm ups and then we practice the form all the way through. That's usually about, I don't know, it's can be as long as 20 minutes to practice the entire form. I mean, it's pretty big. Like it's about 120 movements, 120 plus movements. So it's quite a lot to remember. It was quite a lot to learn. The initial movements of, but initially, you know, when I would practice it in the class, well, I guess initially when I was practicing it in the class, like, you know, it's divided into levels, right? So there's like levels 1 through 6, and levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all like you don't know all the movements. And it was about around level 5 when I finally like knew what all the movements were, right? And then the idea is you get to level 6, and at level 6 you start actually polishing what you've been learning. And so I'm at level 6 now. It took me about, I don't know, it took about a year. It was like a year of consistent effort, and like during a lot of that time, um, during most of that year, I practiced my whatever my Tai Chi form was up to that point every single day, sometimes twice a day. Like I got really deep into it, and I got pretty obsessive, I would say, at a certain point because I was just like, well, I just want to learn this. I want to learn all of it. I want to understand it. I want to see like where it goes. So it did help in terms of learning it and getting it down, right? Um, but the issue was, and there was an issue, was that I wasn't doing the form totally correctly. And so a lot of those like things I was not doing right sort of set in as some body issues, some body pain. You know, like some stiffness in the knees, even though Tai Chi is supposed to be good for your knees and good for like your hips and all this other stuff. Well, if you're doing it right, but if you're not doing it right, right? Literally any exercise, if you don't do it right, isn't going to be good for your body. You have to actually do it correctly. So, anyway, the last couple of months, I've really been starting to feel a certain amount of like attunement, I guess, with the form, in the sense that I'm not thinking about it so much. And that was something that like a lot of people, a lot of instructors and the head instructor was bringing up a lot, which was that, ultimately you want to be at a place where you're not thinking about it at all. It's not something that's like on your mind. It's not something that is, it just happens and comes about automatically. So like I'm starting to get to that point where I'm practicing the form a lot less. Like I probably, previously, like I was saying, I practiced it probably, in total probably 14 times a week, and now I'm practicing it maybe at most 5. And you don't really need to practice it that much after a certain point. And that was something that I really learned from a lot of the other instructors that I worked with, was like, because I would ask, I'd just be like, okay, like this is a lot of movements, like how did you learn them all? And most of them were just like, well, I've just done this for like 20 years. So eventually it just set in. And I was sort of impatient and wanted to get through it like as quickly as possible, because I wanted to. Part of my logic for it too has been like my head instructor's old. Like I don't know how old he is. Like ancient. The way he moves around though, he moves around like a young person. It's very like odd. And but nevertheless, I mean, he's at that age where it's like, well, he's not going to be around forever. The Lord's going to call him back sooner or later. So it's just like, well, I should try and like get to head instructor level as quickly as possible so that I can, you know, um, attain whatever knowledge that like he has that he wants to pass on. And he was even like suggesting to me to like skip levels, and I was just like, well, I don't. That wouldn't feel right. Maybe I should have just listened to the head instructor. I don't know. Anyway, the last couple of sessions, I say like the last 3 months, I have noticed what my practice is like by myself versus what my practice is like in among the whole class are two very different things. When I'm practicing by myself, my mind gets more involved. I'm a little bit more easily distracted. I know I like screw up the form a lot. And then when I'm practicing, in a group, I know that I'm expending a lot more effort. I'm like more concentrated, more like locked in. And I'm sure like part of that is just like being around a group where you're all practicing something pretty much in unison. Like I'm always a little faster. I need to like adjust this. I'm always like a little faster than the class. Although I'm not the only one, it's just that like I'm always like my rhythm's always like a little faster than the rest of the class, and there's like there's always going to be people who are their tempo's a little bit off a bit. So I'm always a little bit faster. There are people whose tempo is a little bit slower. There are people who practice the same form, which is like a yang style Tai Chi, but they're like the way that they execute it has either like a little more flourish to it, or is like a little more like they simplify some things here and there. And that used to be like a distraction for me when I was just starting, or even when I was like just getting to the point where I was practicing the entire form with the entire class. But what changed in the last couple of months is like I'm just not paying attention to the rest of the class in the same way anymore. Like I'm taking in sort of like what's going on around me, but in a peripheral way, right? Like I can see on the periphery how other people are like performing the forms, but it's more and more getting to the point where I'm just kind of like tuning it out a little bit. And like if for instance I find myself in a place where I'm like kind of confused, I'm like, oh, I don't know where in the form we are right now, which by the way is really easy to do. Like even the head instructor at times, if you're just like, hey, how do you do this one thing? Like he has to like, it's almost like watching somebody flip through the pages of the book, but the book is like their body, where he's just like performing the the forms to get to the part that you're like talking about, where it's like maybe you're talking about, well, I want to discuss like single like this transition into single whip from like, and single whip is like, you're not going to see it. Um, so anyway, like you want to discuss like the transition into single whip at this one particular level, let's say. Like maybe it's single whip into like, what is it called? Snake creeps down. Yeah, that's actually kind of a difficult transition. Um, there's a lot of subtleties in it. Anyway, if he wants to show you what he's taught, what you're taught, or like if he wants you to see what y'all are talking about, so that y'all are on the same page, like he basically is like, well, he kind of goes through like 4 or 5 or 7 different forms, and like I said, it's really funny to watch in a way because it's like watching somebody flip through pages, but the pages are their body movements, and that's kind of like it's really changed the way that I've thought about like how my mind and body operate with each other, which is something I really like about Tai Chi. I mean, you could do this with any martial art, really. I mean, any martial art that is heavily centered on like the use of form, like not all martial arts are like that, right? Like boxing to a certain extent, MMA, from what I understand, is not really like that. Like jujitsu isn't really like that, but like karate, Tai Chi, um, Kung Fu, like general Kung Fu. Like Kung Fu is actually, I'm learning Kung Fu is just like a general term. I can't remember what it means exactly, but I mean, it's just a general term for like basically martial arts, right? But essentially, like, if you want to talk about a martial art that came out of China and relies on the use of practicing forms, right? That's usually what is meant by Kung Fu. And so, there's a lot of. So anyway, my whole point about this original spiel is I've just noticed like there's a lot more. I'm gonna use the word energy here, so bear with me. There's a lot more energy involved, right? And like I said, it's probably to a certain extent just like periphery, sort of like, you're in a huge class setup of a bunch of people and that presence sort of puts an extra sort of pressure on your nervous system where you're like, okay, I want to make sure. And that there is that too, where I become acutely aware of the people in the class who are not at the same level that I'm at, like they're at lower levels. So it's like I now have this responsibility to sort of help the people at the lower levels see the form being practiced in a way that is like appropriate, right? Because they're going to watch me because that's what I did when I was at their level. Like I watched how everybody else in the higher levels were performing the form, and that would influence how I learned it and how I like tried to memorize it, because I would say, oh, okay, I noticed this one person, you know, did snake creeps down or like repulse monkey
and that looks more correct than how I was doing it previously. And so like I'll incorporate that. And some people pay more attention than others. Like it's a very interesting martial arts is really interesting in that way. Like if you're somebody who likes if you're a very observant person naturally in like you like paying attention to things in a very like in-depth way. I didn't no, that's not come on, camera. Um AI cameras, I swear. But like I was saying, if you're somebody who like likes paying very in-depth attention to people and things, martial arts might be for you. It's a great way to sort of like study and memorize things in like and for me personally, it was a great way of like getting how would I put this? I'm trying to think of like what are the proper words to describe what I'm trying to say. Like it's nervous system training. Any kind of thing where you're like, learning how to change how your mind and body interact with each other, it's like nervous system training. So anyway, I had another point in here and I forgot it. I'm very annoyed about that. I think the point was anyway. So it's like when you have a thought but you actually have to sneeze. It's like a thought, but the thought is like sneezing. That's how I feel right now. It's like right on the tip of my tongue, but it's not there. So anyway, it's been very like it's been a profoundly useful experience for me. Now, am I going to use Tai Chi to like fight off the barbarian hordes, in Baton Rouge traffic? No, probably not. I feel a little bit more capable than I did previously, but like, I don't expect to be in hand-to-hand combat anytime soon in my life. That's not really why I got into Tai Chi in the first place. Uh, and honestly, like that's not necessarily a reason to get into a martial art. It's a reason, but it doesn't have to be the reason. Um, and honestly, the more that I learn about martial arts, it's about getting your mind and body into a place where you unconsciously feel prepared to protect and defend yourself if you ever have to. Well, if you never have to, right? But it is a part of like life sometimes, and sometimes conflict arises. Sometimes you have people who mean you ill, right? Um, you want to be prepared for that. So anyway, that's one of many reasons for me that Tai Chi's been useful. But mostly it's been useful for, like I said, like what what Robert Anton Wilson and like Timothy Leary call like, well, not just them, and John C. Lilly call, what do they call it? Metaprogramming, right? So it's like changing your brain, changing how it functions, changing your whatever this is. I don't know. Changing your internal setup. It's very useful for that. Gosh, I had another thought in relation to that, and I totally like just lost it. I'm very annoyed with myself about it right now.
because it was like a good thought. It was like you ever have one of those thoughts where you're like, yeah, I'd like to go with that one. That was what it was. It just left me like a little bird. A little bird that was like, you didn't leave me the bird seed that I wanted, so I'm gonna head off. I'll see you later. I'm about to mosey on out into the sky. I got a nest to build. I got a nest to build, sir. I can't wait any further. I don't know. I don't know why I don't know why. Well, I mean, it's a southern bird. Yeah, that's what. That's all birds in the South talk. Why, sir? No, I do not want this bird seed. And I shall not have none of it. I'm moving on. Southern birds are like that. They have their own they have their own code of honor and respect. If you offend them, they'll send you a very strongly worded letter. I was displeased with the service I received at Matthew Gerald Rainwater's house the other day. He only had feeders up for hummingbirds, and I am no mere hummingbird. Cardinals are not big on hummingbirds. That's the story I'm making up right now. They've got beef. Although apparently blue jays are the ones who have beef with everybody, is what I'm learning. Apparently they are extremely rude birds. I had a blue jay the other day treat me with such utter disrespect. And I shall not stand for it no further. There's gotta be civility. If we don't have civility, what else is there left? I guess I'm gonna say that's a cardinal talking about blue jays in the South. That's how it is. That's how it goes. Alright, I'm gonna get ready to start coloring here. Or to be more precise, I'm gonna start flatting. I gotta do something though. I realized I kind of messed up a little bit. Because I'm trying to hide particular elements that I'm working on from your eyes because I don't want you to know certain key factors happening in this story. Alright. Maybe, hopefully, I can hide it from you appropriately. Besides, that's part of the fun of this little game we get to play. Okay, there's like a lot, actually. By the way, Hizzard's gonna be fine, but you should see the other guy. I don't know if I've complained enough about flatting. I don't know if you've heard enough comic artists complain enough about flatting. But it is part of the process, and it's a little bit on the tedious side of things. Not my favorite. However, I do like coloring in general. Like, Coloring's pretty fun, especially once like especially if there's like a mood I want to set in a panel. Coloring is super fun because then I can mess around with brushes. I can use textures and things like that to like appropriate effect. Oh, wow. Hmm. But for some reason, it's very difficult for me to like flatting. I will say this about flatting, and I've done it on, like multiple different sort of what's the word like at multiple different levels of expertise. I've done it professionally. I've done it as like a side hustle. I've done it for myself. I've paid people to do it for me. It's one of those things where it is like if you have like an audiobook or a podcast you want to listen to, it can actually be kind of relaxing. And there are a lot of people who do it as a side gig in comics. Um, they help they help out other artists by doing flatting for them. Like I said, I've done that before in a couple of different projects. Don't know if I'd ever really want to do it again. I think I'm good on doing it for myself and kind of calling it there at this point. There's a point at which it's like, okay, I'm I'm full. I've had my fill of this activity. And what's great about this comic is I don't have to do that much of it. It's usually pretty fast. Ooh, I need to find something. I need to find a reference for Ganderdal's castle because I don't remember what colors I'm using for it. Why, sir, you have trespassed upon my tree. Do you not know that this is the home of Beauregard T. Cardinal? That's going to be in my head the rest of the day. Southern Gentleman Cardinal. Oh, come on. Where is it? Oh, that's probably too much. Spoilers. I really don't remember what colors his castle are. Oh, here we go. That's what I was looking for. I need to make like a reference sheet at some point instead of having to like go through the entirety of the strip like I'm flipping through the pages of the Bible or something. Or the I Ching, which is probably more appropriate to like what I flip through the pages of most often. Okay, here we go. I spend way more. That's what's really funny too. Is like I end up spending way more time trying to find the colors than it actually takes to flat. Thanks to the wonderful, handy dandy Clip Studio paint bucket tool. God bless. I think I want there to be a fair amount of blue in the night sky for this panel. But maybe I shouldn't do it like that. I don't know. Alright, and then
Is that panel done? Let's hide that panel. Oh my gosh. Verb says, I'm going to add to your thoughts the image of Corvid conspiracy from Root, whose only goal is the chaos and shinies. Yeah, the Corvids are very fun. I've never played the other bird population, the ones that have the decree. I played against them a lot, but I haven't played as them. What are they called? I can't remember. It's like the Airy or something. But yeah, the Corvid conspiracy is a lot of fun, actually. Because you get to set traps and stuff. And just generally annoy everybody else on the board. I played the Corvids. Can't remember who all I've played. I know I've at least played the Corvids, and I've at least played the Marquis de Cat. Verb says, Irie Dynasties? Oh, Dynasties. The Irie Dynasties. My brain. Yes. They seem fun, though, but they seem kind of difficult, too, because as far as I'm aware, it's like you really have to keep a certain pace and rhythm in terms of like how you conquer territories and stuff. And then if you mess up that pace or somebody messes up, it's kind of easy to mess up their pace too. You can just like sit back for a turn, and if they go into turmoil, it's like, now's my chance. Like I was playing against somebody who was the Irie Dynasty, and I was as the Marquis de Cat, and like the Marquis de Cat in that game, they're basically like they're pretty basic, right? Like you can just all you have to do is just get your resources and you just expand. But then you also just make like your whole goal, right, is to just like not lose. Like just stay as stable as possible, which is can be difficult late game if you're not like keeping your eye on like what is it called, the animal, like the rebels or whatever, the animal underground or whatever. Oh, that was the other one I played, was the lizards, the cult lizards. They're fun too. Verb says, now that I'm watching JoJo, Joseph and the Corvids have a lot in common. Yeah, I know you know what I'm planning, so I put the box. I'm gonna assume that's box here, and now you're dead. Or bomb. Yeah, the bomb. They're a lot of fun. But yeah, the cultist lizards are also a lot of fun. They're a little weird, like because their whole thing is like they don't have a base or anything. They just kind of pop up. And if I remember correctly, because it's been a while since I played, but the culty lizard's whole thing is to just basically like you're trying to convert other players to their like cause. Another one that looked really interesting to play was the I was gonna call him the Vagrant. He's not the Vagrant. He's just like He's like a beaver or something. It's just a single person, and his whole thing is to just trade with everybody. And his goal is to just like get all the best weapons and stuff, and like, um, I think you have to like get a certain number of items. Anyway, yeah, we're talking about me and Verb are talking about Root, and it's a very fun board game if you ever get a chance to play it. It's a very like what I like about it is that you have several different play styles to pick from, and they all kind of interact with each other in interesting ways. And so it's a very like holistic kind of board game. Like you have to like really consider um, how each group interacts with each other on the whole map. So it is like rather complex, but it's also it's relatively simple to pick up. I think what like tricks a lot of people about that game is that everybody is kind of playing their own board game, and so that initially can be kind of confusing at first. But so long as you like, kind of get into the state of mind of like, okay, I'm playing my game, they're playing their game, and I just need to make sure that I don't let their game intrude on my game. But I highly recommend it if you ever get a chance to play. The last board game I played recently that I really enjoyed, but I don't know, a lot of other people at the table did not enjoy it, was called, I'm just going to call it Wise. It's just YS. Verb says Vagabond. That's Verb's referencing the single character who like collects items on the map. That's the Vagabond. There's a bunch of characters you can choose from, and you can have 2 Vagabonds if you have the DLC. That's cool. That would add another level of complexity. But yeah, the Vagabond character does seem pretty cool. And he ends up sort of like the Vagabond ends up making sort of an interesting tension and dynamic, because if you team up with a Vagabond, it can be very useful to you, right? Like the last game I played, I teamed up pretty heavy with the Vagabond to the point that I almost like single-handedly won the game for him, but he didn't win. The Animal Underground, or whatever they're called, I think it's the Animal Underground, ended up winning. They ended up coming up from behind because they just totally ruined my game because I wasn't paying attention to them, and I was too like I was paying too much attention to the Airy because they were so aggressively like getting onto my cat turf. And so like my entire strategy during that game was just like, okay, all I need to do is outlast the Airy and like um not try and conquer too hard too fast, because as soon as like I get into their turf, like they will wreck me immediately. So I did that all right for a little bit, but I was too focused on them, and so like I wasn't able to do much about like all the Animal Underground shenanigans, and so I got wrecked by them, and then they won. That's how that game goes. But anyway, this other board game I was playing was called Wise, and it's like a bidding type game. It's kind of confusing initially because there's like several different things that you can do on the board, but what I liked about it is that it's one of those games where you can kind of see how everybody else is going and do like an alternative strategy to sort of mess them up and sort of lead them away from their initial strategy so that you can
set the tempo for the game, basically. Like it was pretty fun. It's an older game though, so I don't know if it I don't know if it would be easy to find. May not. It may also not be your cup of tea. Because everybody's into kind of like different sorts of games. Some people really like the heavy like strategy type games, which I would put Root pretty firmly in. Like it's within the realm of like like Warcraft Risk kind of stuff, right? Wise, there's not. I don't know, like those bidding type games I really like, but they're not like a popular genre at all. They're fairly they're fairly unpopular, I would say. There's another one that's really good that's a bidding type auctioning game called I think it's called Isle of Skye. And you like play different like Scottish clans and like you're trying to build out your land basically. So it's a little bit like Carcassonne meets a bidding game. I can't think of there's not like a popular bidding game to compare to. Um, I'm gonna have to do a couple things with these panels because Judy's supposed to be sort of more in the dark, and that current. What happened to Clip? Sorry, y'all. I'm having an issue. Clip Studio is giving me trouble. Okay. Just wouldn't let me click on stuff. That was annoying me. I'm actually going to go play board games later on today. And this is very interesting in this board game group I'm a part of because I think I've never done a session with them where I didn't at least play one completely new game. Which to me is kind of crazy because it's like there are that many board games out there that you can just like. Well, I guess this is the case too when you're hanging out with board game collectors, right? Because like I've probably talked about this before, but there are a lot of board games that are totally out of print, and so like a lot of collectors hold on to them because they're either highly prized or they're just really fun games, right? There's just like some games out there that for whatever reason went out of print and like they're very difficult to find, but in the communities people are like, oh no, this game rocks, like they should make it again, but they won't. And so people hold on to their games, let it rack up value, or like just enjoy them and have fun with them. So I think my plan is I want to color these pages before I call it for today, which is pretty doable. And the funny thing about coloring is I always think coloring is going to take longer than it actually does. It usually does not take that long. The only part that takes long is the part that I'm doing right now, which is like putting on all the shadows. That usually takes a while because I have to think sort of, in a concentrated way of like, okay, what should the lighting be on this panel? How should it work out? Like, sometimes I have this, very often, if I'm in a rush and like I don't want to put a lot of thought into it, I will have like I'll have the lighting come in from like that direction, some like from the top to the bottom. Like that's a very easy way of doing it, but the issue with that is that you wouldn't want to do that for everything. There's certain times where you want to like compose a shot in such a way that you might want the lighting to come from beneath or from the side, right? It just depends on what you're going for. If you're just for myself, like if it's just like I just want to get the point across and there's not like a major emotional beat that I need to establish. And most, like even most emotional beats that you want to establish, you're usually just going to do that through like body language and facial expressions. The lighting doesn't necessarily need to be like part of it. And if you do try and make the lighting part of it, it needs to be needs to be a reason for it. It needs to be that extreme of an emotion, or there needs to be some like impetus within the scene to like have it make sense. I think it can be, it could be too easy to like, or not easy, that's not the right word. It could be too like tempting to go super dramatic for everything. But that can often turn a reader off, right? It depends on what kind of story you're telling too. Like this story has so many humor beats to it that I don't want to like overdo dramatic beats. Because the issue with dramatic beats is like there's a very tight balance that I'm always kind of like trying to straddle. And that balance is like, when do I want the reader to feel like a more towards a drama type emotional connection versus when do I want the reader to feel like a humor type emotional connection? And you can really mess up the tone of a story if you don't get that balance properly right, properly correct. You can even like really lose a reader, right? Like, I mean, that's happened with Trailer Park Warlock. So I've taken a certain amount of like experience learned from Trailer Park Warlock and like been trying to find ways to better pace myself and how I do emotional beats. I mean, I like how I wrote Trailer Park Warlock, but I will say there were some tonal shifts in that story that may have turned a lot of people off, and so I'm learning how to better like either because the tonal shifts are like too immediate or too extreme or whatever. And so I'm trying to figure out how to better balance that out as a storyteller. And that's one of those things that just like it comes with experience and making mistakes. It comes with being willing to embrace some mistakes too and take some like creative risks. All right, so that panel's done. Well, it's not done, but it's relatively done. Hold on. But I used to not color at all in Clip Studio. I used to do all my coloring in Photoshop. And then
trying to remember why I changed. Oh, I know exactly why. I didn't like the brushes available in my version of Photoshop, and I didn't want to like pay for a new version. Like I'm trying to avoid being on a subscription model with Photoshop for as long as I can. We'll see how we'll see how long I can make it. Um, same with Clip Studio, because Clip Studio is now starting to transition into a subscription model. So I'm just like, all right, well, I guess I'm gonna have to really make my copies that I have, like the copies that I own of Clip Studio, really like go as far as I can. But main reason I switched over to Clip Studio for coloring, and I would do all my comics in Clip Studio except for Clip Studio's like font tools are just atrocious, or I just don't, either that or I don't understand them. But generally, I think that they're atrocious, and I would love to be proved incorrect on that. Like, I would love to find out that there's some like tweak or like some kind of tool that I'm missing and I don't fully understand. Because if that were true, then I would just switch fully to Clip Studio, I think, at this point. Like, I really like Clip Studio a lot. And like I said, the only thing that actually like keeps me from using it whole hog is the fact that Clip Studio just doesn't, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't have a very useful type tool. Its type tool is extremely limited from my experience, and or at least compared to Photoshop. And Photoshop lets me do a lot with the type tool that allows me to like do sound effects that are like, I can make them into more organic shapes. Um, it's been perfect for lettering for comics, which is really odd because like Clip Studio, that is the oddest thing to me, because Clip Studio is technically like designed as like a comics making program, but for some reason the type tool is extremely I don't like it. It's extremely limited. So like I said, if there's anybody out there who knows a couple things about the type tool that I don't know, and love to pinpoint me to some like tutorial, I'd love to hear it, because I'm very close to wanting to just completely get off of what's beeping? No. I'm very close to wanting to get off of Photoshop entirely. Because otherwise I'm just going to be writing on this really old copy of CS3 that I've been using for decades at this point. I mean, not that it works. Like, it works perfectly fine. It's just like, I don't know. It's getting kind of. A part of me is like, oh, maybe there could be issues in the future if I'm like, maybe file types are too old, or like, but I haven't had any issues. Not yet. And hopefully I don't in the future, but there is some part of me that's like, well, maybe there could be at some point. I always veer off on a tangent and forget like what I was talking about previously. I was complimenting Clip Studio, and I was complaining about Photoshop, and then I was complaining about Clip Studio. Oh, right. So, like, I started coloring entirely in Clip Studio because I liked their brushes, and I liked, like, the file sizes are better in Clip Studio. Like, Clip Studio, I don't,
I think it's called CLP or whatever the Clip Studio file format is. it's it's not like you can't use it for printing. You can't use it for like I don't know general professional usage in that sense because uh, Photoshop document or PSD dominates the landscape as far as like if you want to transfer files between two people and you need them to be editable files. Like it's very interesting when you think about it. PSD, I don't think PSD is going anywhere as a file format. Um, I mean, I guess there's TIFF. Well, this is like super inside baseball conversation, but these are things I think about sometimes. I don't know if this is a I don't know if this is a symptom of like I need to do something different with my life or what, but um, TIFF, I think TIFF, it's a different kind of file format, but I think it's designed to be a little more um, translatable between programs. Although I don't know, everything uses PSD, so I don't know. I don't know if it's that big of a deal. But I do wonder sometimes, like, do you think that's going to be updated at some point? Do you think people are going to, like, switch over from PSD to something else? That kind of bothers me. Because if that did happen, it would screw up quite a lot. So, I don't know. I mean, I have file backups of most of everything that I've worked on in JPEG, which I'm pretty sure JPEG's not going to go anywhere as a file format. It's so ubiquitous on the internet. But I guess that could change too. Everything is liable to change. For better or worse. My favorite file format is probably PNG, but like nobody uses PNG that much. But it's like the most useful in the sense of its low file size, and you can maintain transparencies with it. Excuse me. Now, if you could like do all that and also make it an editable file, which I mean you kind of can, but in general, PNG like generally wants to like flatten to maintain that appropriately small file size for printing and whatnot. Anyway. Okay, I have to be mindful. There's a light source that's coming from this direction. So I need to change sort of how I've got this set up, actually. Will you let me? Okay. I didn't think about that.
it is starting to get warm. It must be a humid day today. I haven't been outside at all yet. The weather's been like so nice the last couple of days in Louisiana. But you know, Louisiana being Louisiana doesn't stay that way forever. So it's probably gotten humid and warm. Lately, I have been listening. My musical. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but like, you suddenly have this moment in your life where all your musical tastes like change all at once. And what happened was like, I started listening to this band, I guess, called Penguin Cafe Orchestra, and it's very like acoustic instruments, a lot of guitar. And, I think the band is like composed of a guitar, sometimes a guitar, sometimes like ukulele, cello, drums, some woodwinds here or there. It's all instrumentals, right? And in general, I really like instrumentals. In general, there was a long period of time in my life where like most of my music listening was instrumental music, and that was largely due to like being into video games. So like a lot of the music I would listen to was video game music or like anime, right? Like I would say when I first started really honestly like listening to music, which was in high school, it was all like anime soundtracks and jazz. Like I listened to the Beatles as well, but like I listened to a lot of Beatles actually. um, but that was like the only band that I listened to that was like lyrically inclined. So like everything else was like the Cowboy Bebop soundtrack. Um, there were a couple other anime. A lot of anime like opening themes. I'm trying to remember. I had this CD. Oh, this will really date me. At that time, the big thing was like burning your own CDs because this was the era of uh, music piracy. And so me and my friends, we had our LimeWire accounts or Kazaa or like, whatever. There's a bunch of different Napster, all that stuff. So like I had one friend, my friend, I think it was Ryan. I'm going to blame him. Um, my friend Ryan like had started making like a playlist of his own, right? And it was all just like anime openings and ending themes that he had like just found. I don't even know how he came across them because at the time like anime was still pretty like new to the United States, and so you kind of like would see or hear about anime sort of like whispered on forums, and there were a lot of shows that were like, this has never been dubbed, this has never been subtitled, it'll never come to the United States, right? That kind of stuff. Early days. Um, so any sort of like even the vaguest hint of an anime was like super exciting. Like I remember like listening to like the Love Hina opening song like over and over again. That show, by the way, is like super weird. It's like a harem anime. Um, but or other like anime like Fushigi Yugi or like that's also a harem anime. There were a lot of harem anime at the time. Uh, it was super popular at that age in high school. It's kind of cringe now, but anyway, um, there's like Rurouni Kenshin, Inuyasha. Uh, Curiously enough, like none of my friends were into the Dragon Ball Z opening theme, and nowadays it's like my favorite thing ever. I think uh, I think that original opening theme is kind of like one of the greatest songs ever because it just gets me pumped to like go do whatever it is I'm about to do, whether it's working out or drawing or like baking bread, breaking bread to like or baking breaking bread, baking bread to head chala. Mr. Horse says we didn't have much to choose from. That's very true. We had whatever was available at the Sun Coast. God bless. Using all those Sun Coast points. Um, if even that, right? Because like largely, um, largely what I watched was whatever my friends pirated. Because I didn't like I had like a at that time I had a much lower bandwidth internet than the rest of my friends, so like I essentially subsisted on like all of my entertainment basically subsisted on whatever it was my friends were downloading and like were willing to share, right? And so, you know, it was a lot of whatever was currently popular in Japan at the time. Or whatever was like currently popular on like web forums. And there's kind of ages too. There were like ages of or epochs of like getting into anime because it started with, and I was thinking about this last night because it was as preamble to this. Adult Swim is like playing. They're doing like a 30th anniversary of, which is kind of crazy. A 30th anniversary of like Space Ghost Coast to Coast. That makes me feel old because I didn't realize I was 8 years old when Space Ghost Coast to Coast came out. That was one of those shows that blew my mind as a kid because it was just like, what is happening? So anyway, they're doing like a marathon of just like old episodes of Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Sorry, I gotta reset Clip Studio again. Oh, what is going on? He is giving me trouble. Probably need to save. Okay. Um. So anyway, that got me thinking when I was watching the marathon last night of Space Ghost Coast to Coast. It was reminding me of as a kid watching Cartoon Network and like when that transition happened over into like the Toonami era of Cartoon Network. Because initially when Toonami came out, I was kind of confused because I felt like their whole setup, right, where you had this robot named Tom who lived on a spaceship or something that was kind of like a pirate radio broadcast spaceship. The setup reminded me and my friends that it made us think about like, wait, are they like copying Space Ghost Coast to Coast? Like, is that like the idea here? So anyway, the Toonami era was a pretty mind-blowing moment, I think, for a lot of kids at that time, because most of us didn't have any sort of like idea of what the heck anime was to begin with, right?
like my first exposure to anime was probably Sailor Moon, and it was just because like I didn't have cable TV until I was 13. So I think I was in 5th grade when this happened. Like all of my TV watching was on an analog um, antenna. So, there was often static. There was often, and then oftentimes I would get like broadcasts from other stations, sometimes in Texas or sometimes like maybe in Lafayette. Like if the weather just happened to be good, every once in a while I would pick up stations from another city and they had different like broadcasting schedules than in my city. So one morning I just so happened to like be switching through the channels and like suddenly, and this is kind of what makes, to me this is kind of what made analog broadcasting sort of special and exciting, was that you would have these kind of weird moments of like, oh, whoa, what is this? So anyway, one morning I was just flipping through the channels before school just to see what cartoons were on, and there was a show that came on. I was like, what is this? Because like the eyes were super big, it was super stylized, like it was just totally different. And I didn't even know what the show was called at the time, but then later on I would see it again and I was like, "Oh, that show was called Sailor Moon. That must have been what I was watching." That was my first exposure. My second exposure was one morning I got up early because I had to get ready for a soccer game. So like I had to get up like at 5:30 in the morning, which at the time didn't bother me, but looking back is like, ugh. But anyway, so getting up at like 5:30, I was like, once again, just so happened to like catch whatever the cartoon schedule was, and like there was another show that was like kind of a similar style to Sailor Moon, but like had totally different stuff going on. There was like fighting and like weird characters, and I would learn that show was called Dragon Ball. Once again, I never really was able to keep up with it, but then Toonami happens, right? Many years later. Mr. Horse asks, "Wait, what is it called?" I had to steal away. I was talking about Dragon Ball, and before that, I was talking about um, Sailor Moon, and I was just talking about on analog TV. Well, before Dragon Ball Z, there was Dragon Ball, right? And that was like following the adventures of young kid Goku. And like, you get introduced to the Dragon Balls, and then like that was all the stuff with the Red Ribbon Army, and like when you first meet Piccolo for the first time, and all this other stuff. And then Dragon Ball Z is like Goku when he's like, older, has kids, blah blah blah. Anyway, what I was gonna say was that Toonami happened, and I was introduced to Dragon Ball Z, right? I had not had that much exposure to Dragon Ball, so I didn't really fully understand all of that story. But I was just like, oh, this is like that other show that I saw long, long ago on analog TV that I had just gotten the barest whispers of, right? Well, I got really into Dragon Ball Z. Like really like deeply into it, like recording episodes on my VHS, like just nerding out as much as I could on it, right? And that like any gateway drug, it led, to my further interest in like, anything anime. And it was the same for the rest of my friends. It was just so different and so unique, and so like at that time there was nothing that had been like it up to that point in terms of stuff that we were watching on TV. Not to say that there weren't like good American cartoons to watch at the time because there were plenty of them. But anime certainly stole a lot of our attention because it was just like usually the themes were more adult than a lot of the themes in um, like American cartoons, or like at least more mature, seemed more mature to us. Um, of course, the stylization of everything, like, the intense action, stuff like that. Like, there was always sort of this sense of like you didn't really know what was going to happen. And that was part of what created, I think, the interest for me and my friends. It was a very fresh take, right? Because up until that point, the cartoons that I was into were like, what does Mr. Horse say? Mr. Horse says, I used to do that with the Starship Trooper TV show. I would record or wake up super early to watch. Yeah, Starship Troopers was really cool too. My dad was really into that show actually. He loved it. I remember because it would come on Sunday. So like it would always be on before we went to church. And so it was funny because I was not into it as much as my dad, and then sometimes I'd want to flip through and just see what else was on. But then like my dad would see that Roughnecks was on. He's like, "Wait, hold on, we're gonna watch this." I was like, "Oh, okay, fine." I think that's what it was called. I think it was called Starship Troopers Roughnecks. Um, but that was a cool show, and it was at that time too. Like I wasn't as into like the that universe, and then I like read the book, and I was like, "Oh, actually, this is pretty cool." Like the book's actually really good. But yeah, like my and my dad was really into Starship Troopers, and I think that was because he served in the military, so I think that was kind of a big part of it too. Because like the original book is like Robert Heinlein sort of what's the word, like sort of allegorically retelling his own experience in the Navy or wherever I think he served in the Navy. I'm pretty sure he served in the Navy. So it's a lot of him, like in the book, it's a lot of him talking about the experience he gained, how he matured as a person, and sort of how his identity in regards to how he viewed himself and his country changed during that time in service. So like it's a very interesting story. I'll put it that way. And I see why it was really like, important to my dad, because I think he learned a lot, or like a lot of his experience and personality sort of came as part of like his inspiration from him reading that book when he was a kid. I'm pretty sure he read it as a kid. So anyway, back to anime. So for me, around that same time, and similarly themed actually in some ways, was Gundam Wing. So like Gundam Wing came out on Toonami, and like something that should be said about Toonami, and part of what I think led to their effectiveness, in marketing anime to the kids, was they had like these really cool like basically anime music videos. Like before AMVs were really fully a thing, they kind of like started the AMV thing. So they would have like really cool music edited in such a way to like hype up the show, right? And they did a very effective job on it. They did such an effective job of it, in fact, that like those AMVs that they did were almost like their own form of art that you got to appreciate before the show itself started. They were even able to like make shows like, I'm not a big fan of Voltron, but they made Voltron really cool. Like, they made, they could make Hanna-Barbera action cartoons look really cool. Not that I didn't have my moment in my life where I liked them. Like, I did. There was a moment in my life where I was really into, like, actual Space Ghost and not just Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Or, like, the Herculoids, or, like, Birdman. Birdman was probably my least favorite. I didn't care that much for Birdman.
um, like the original action show. The one that I really liked was Johnny Quest. Johnny Quest was like my favorite. Um, that was one that like I always turned up for because I think I just enjoyed. First of all, I can say looking back on it, the background work that they did on that show was like really incredible. And the character designs are good and there's like an interesting sort of like vibe to it. Mr. Horse says, "Yeah, I remember those AMVs. I just wasn't into anime yet. My brother loved Robotech. Oh my god. Don't get me started about Robotech." Oh god. Robotech took over my life. Like um even more so than Dragon Ball Z, I want to say, cuz like Robotech was one of those things where it blew my mind. Like I did not understand what I had gotten into. And I think, just the transforming jet fighter thing was just there's so little that you can do as a child when you're exposed to something that cool. it's like it's like how I felt when I saw Jurassic Park for the first time. Like there was just like nothing. There's no going back. You know. Um. So yeah, like Robotech was one of those things that heavily influenced me as a child, and would later influence my interest in like Gundam Wing and like the other Gundam series. But I think the things I really liked the most about, okay, beyond just like transforming jet fighters, right? Um, it was the first cartoon that I had watched that had like a really intensely overlapping storyline. I mean, it's basically a soap opera, but like, or space opera, but like, the fact that there was a reason to keep turning up for every episode, and there was like all these intricate plot lines between characters, that was the first time I had really come into contact with that. And it was like every time I got back from school, I was like, I got to get ready for Robotech. Like, I have to be prepared. I have to be emotionally prepared for what is going to happen. And, see if the SDF-1 like fires its super laser, which I thought was the coolest thing ever as a kid. um, because like once again, it's like there was not a single American TV show that was willing to just like we're gonna we're gonna show this giant space fortress annihilate like everything in its path, and then make you as a kid consider, the consider like the consequences of a weapon this powerful. Um, that was definitely part of the charm of that show. That's for sure. It it would like well, and what I would learn later on, right, which is also very interesting, is that Robotech was essentially like kind of what Haim Saban did with the Power Rangers, where it was like they took a Japanese property and they kind of mixed it up or put their own editation on it and turned it into their own storyline. And like there's stuff that's in line with Macross, the original Japanese series, but not 100%, right? They have their own like um, take, I guess you could say, and it's I mean, it's interesting too because like I haven't even really watched the original Macross that it's based on, and that's largely because Robotech is so deeply entrenched in my heart, right? Like it's just like I this is Rick Hunter, the Rick Hunter of Robotech, not this whoever in Macross, which it might still be Rick Hunter. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, I love that show. But before that, and I was gonna say earlier, like before all that, the thing for me was like, and this speaks to sort of the effectiveness of American animation at that time. Um, Stuff like Dexter's Laboratory, which was like an incredible show. Um, Animaniacs, which is pretty good. Tiny Toon Adventures, but mostly like that. Like up to before Toonami, Cartoon Network had done this thing that I hasn't really been done since then, which was Cartoon Network basically bankrolled a bunch of animators to like make their dream project, right? Gendy Tartakovsky was like one of those animators who turned out to be like extremely creative, extremely like kind of on the frontier in a lot of ways of like American. Hold on, I'm gonna do something right here. This is bothering me. Of American animation, and so he made what I think are probably some of the best like American cartoons that have ever been made during that period of time, right? Um, so I was probably that might have been between fourth and like sixth grade. Dexter's Laboratory like rocked the house, right? Like that was the show. And then there were some other really good shows at that time. There was Cow and Chicken. There was give me a second. I'm trying to remember what were my favorite ones that I watched. Because there were so many things that got built off of Dexter's Laboratory, right? Because it's like the Powerpuff Girls was built off of Dexter's Laboratory. And all the like Craig McCracken type stuff got built off of that. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking here. Well, disregarding the Dexter's Laboratory stuff, there was also like Ed, Ed and Eddie, which was a pretty big show. Courage the Cowardly Dog. Although it took a while for Courage to get its own show. It didn't. It was one of those things where, for a long time on Cartoon Network, or seemed like a long time anyway, they did like. They had like a show that kind of showcased all the stuff that they had basically bankrolled, right? I think it was called What a Cartoon. I can't quite remember what it was called, but it was basically like 30 minutes, and like they would have different like random things that like maybe Two Stupid Dogs. That was another show I forgot about. That was a good one. Et cetera, et cetera. Right. So anyway, I think what happened was they would keep playing that What a Cartoon show and use it as a showcase of like animators that they did have on staff or animators that they had a dialogue with, et cetera, et cetera. And they would kind of see how the audience responded to it, right? And it would become like a way for them to consider other shows that they would make later on. It was actually like a pretty decent model of like, figuring out how to like cater to your audience in such a way that was relatively effective, right? Like there was a lot of cartoons that came from all that experimentation and just sort of like willingness to embrace whatever the hell it was that they were doing. But excuse me. Sorry, this is something that's kind of taking a little bit of my mental space. Just want to make sure I'm doing this correctly. But yeah, I mean, there was like a huge blossoming of American animation right up until Toonami. And so like it's very interesting to think about because not to
not to denigrate or like put down American cartoons at that point, but it's just like once I was exposed to like the Japanese way of doing things, I suddenly just became super interested in that because I wanted to be involved in those like long-term storylines and like, you know, for me, I was always interested to find the next show that had like these that pushed in my mind like the envelope of like how good animation could get. And it's interesting looking at anime nowadays versus then. Like there are certainly shows now that are like pushing the envelope on animation in such a way where it's just like, I mean, it's not even comparable how good the animation has gotten. Like I don't even keep up with One Piece that well, but like I have watched so much of like the Luffy Kaido fight that I'm just like, I guess I should just like at least watch this arc or something because I want to. The animation in that fight is unbelievably good. Like just unreal how much like effort went into making it, and it's just like joyously goofy and weird and fun, and has like all these homages to like traditional animation and to like to Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry and stuff. And it's just like, to me, I'm like, that right there, that's it. Like that is the pinnacle of animation in my mind. Because I'm deeply like, I've always been a deeply big nerd on animation. I've always really enjoyed like, especially a lot of those older American cartoons, because that's the stuff that I grew up on before having cable, right? Like I grew up on like Tom and Jerry, Looney Tunes, like Droopy Dog, like all that stuff. Um, so for me, it's like, and it's interesting to see too because I think later generations actually are kind of interested in it still. Like it seems to have a certain amount of staying power in the same way that like I was able to find Johnny Quest really interesting as a kid. It seems like younger generations are still finding like some stuff in Tom and Jerry cartoons that are like really interesting for them. Um, Not the least of which because they're like actually pretty hilarious and like have like pretty insane like gags that are not really present in any modern day animation. I think largely because tastes and humor have changed a lot. Our tastes in would have like in like what studios feel is acceptable, you know, as humor to put to fund essentially. And because of that, like, you know, there's a lot of great talent that's not really been allowed to like thrive in the same way. And that happens. Like tastes change, times change, sort of like where people are willing to take risks. You know, monetary risk changes. But I can't help but notice, you know, well, hell, if people still find Tom and Jerry interesting even now, like there must be something there where you could still take that sense of humor and translate it even to nowadays, right? It's just like nobody's really taken that chance yet. All right, I'm going to finish out these panels. Hold on. I'm trying to remember what got me thinking about Tom and Jerry, though. That was One Piece. And then, so anyway, the issue, the main issue of animation has always been the main issue of animation for forever, is that it is very costly because you have to pay, you know, these teams of professional artists to animate the stuff, right? Because you got your storyboard artists, you got your
got your lead animator, you got your tweeners, although that's kind of changing. Um, like your keyframe artists, you have voice actors, sound effects person, blah blah blah. Right? It's a lot. Um, this is why animation kind of goes through cycles too. And you might see that like with movies, right? Where we went through a long time where there weren't really a lot of like animated movies. Like even DreamWorks wasn't doing that many, and then like there'll be these pops where you'll see like suddenly there are a lot of animated movies in theaters for a bit, and then it like goes into a lull, and then it pops again. I think it's my guess on this, and I don't really know, but my guess on this is that it's probably due to sort of like when do certain age groups mature, right? Certain generations of age groups mature or get to an age where like studios go, okay, I think we could afford bankrolling like a Paw Patrol movie or like a Trolls 4 or whatever, you know. Um, there's always different like risk levels that these studios have to take when they try and figure out like, okay, are we going to spend the 300 million or however much we're going to spend to bankroll a Super Mario Brothers movie or whatever, name your property. Which is unfortunately why there are so many movies nowadays made that are like based off of licensed properties. It's because studios want to take less of a risk, right? So they're always, and I think that's also why you often see like this kind of track that happens where maybe an original, especially with original properties always kind of go on this track of like, well, it started as a comic book or it started as a prose novel or whatever, and then it became a show or a cartoon, and then it became a movie, and then it became a video game. It always starts from like what is the lowest cost, least risk thing, and then sort of like moves up in more and more sophistication. Got a couple of things I need to do for these pages. Which is also why comic books became super popular for a while, because it was like, okay, you can mine or pull from already established stories. So like you already know what you're getting, right? This is why Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has been like done over and over and over again. There's so many different versions of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because I think first of all, I think the licensing on it must be pretty affordable for studios. That's my first guess. Secondly, it just has a lot of staying power, right? Um, Kids love them. I love them. As when I was a kid, I loved the hell out of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like, that was a thing that I was into for a long time. I remember watching like the live action movies. I even liked 3. Like nobody likes 3, and I liked 3 as a kid. Maybe I just have terrible taste. I don't know. But I always thought 3 was a pretty good one. But it's a time travel story, so not everybody's into it. But likely Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is going to be around for forever, right? Like I might be on my deathbed with my kids watching, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. And the last thing I see before I fade out is like Michelangelo saying "Cowabunga." But that's the kind of property that it is. Which is kind of rare. Like there's not that many like Looney Tunes, which to me is like
I mean, this is just me though. Like even Looney Tunes, which I think is like the quintessential American cartoon property, doesn't get like relaunched that often, or hardly ever even. Like, they make their way around, they show up, but I mean, nobody's ever really willing to like, oh, let's do another Looney Tunes movie. Like it's just like not that's not a thing, right? Like it was a big risk for Warner Brothers to be like, we're going to make a Space Jam 2 because the Space Jam 1 was a pretty big risk actually. And it's kind of unfortunate because like I'm not that into the Space Jam movies, but I am really into like Looney Tunes and would love to see like a little bit more of that, right? I know that and I haven't watched it yet, but I know that they like did something for HBO Max that was like a Looney Tunes thing. And I've heard it's pretty good. I just haven't had the chance to watch it. I need to check it out. Anyway, I think I am going to call it for today. We've done, oh my God, we've almost done 2 hours. All right. Anyway, it was good hanging out. Y'all have a good day. And I will talk to y'all again in the future. I always enjoy doing these streams. And I've gotten a lot of work done, not quite done. Gonna finish it out. But I need to concentrate a little bit more and not distract myself thinking about Looney Tunes. Anyway, I'll talk to y'all later. All right? Bye. Oh, not yet. Sorry. Bye.